Okay, before I start, I would like to take two ideas that I learned from Captain Tommy, and I would like you to apply it. First of all, I need to move my emotional responsibility from being nervous and fearful of making a perfect presentation to uh, to at least agree that I wrote my presentation. So that's a good start. Second of all, you need to take some accountability too. Now, if the presentation doesn't turn out right, it's more likely that your expectation was too high. Now, so let's agree that you will at least bring down your expectation to about 80%, right? Then if I had to assume that I perform at 85%, then I exceeded your expectation. Then by default, this becomes a reasonably meaningful presentation. Now, my issue is this. Unlike the earlier presentation, this is a personal experience, and it's an experience of a school. We were designing a situation that we couldn't copy. You know what if you're an engineer in Finland or an engineer in Switzerland or engineer in Germany, you could be just as good as an engineer in Malaysia if you copy the curriculum. Unfortunately, for my School of Education, the system was different. Because we were taking students from one kind of environment, training them artificially for 3 years, and expecting them to go and perform in another kind of environment. For example, if you had to draw that analogy, if I was to bring you from school system, train you to be an accountant, then expect you to work as an engineer. You know, it doesn't work so easily. So this, what I'll be sharing with you, it's a journey that we have taken over the last 3 years, and how we are, I won't guarantee we have solved the problem, but it appears that we are getting closer and closer in solving the problem. So the first part here is this. Now, my approach is to create holistic education for teachers. Assumption was, this is the assumption, education was always holistic until we decided to mess it up. So education started off for historical reason from an apprenticeship point of view, where a lot of attention was paid for learning to become. So those days when you wanted to be a doctor, you went and apprenticed yourself under a doctor. His intention was to train you to become a doctor, not so much to master biochemistry, anatomy, physiology, things like that. So if you take Captain Tommy, he was not interested whether you understood the physics of avionics. He needed to train you to become a pilot. So the idea was very holistic, because to learn to be subsumes to learn to know, and I wrote another sexy term. Learn to be subsuming learning to know and learning to do. But because we wanted to customize it, hold on, because I'm trying to do two things at the same time here. Okay, so what happened was, once we wanted to industrialize and manufacture teaching in a larger scale, we went and created schools. And what that school did, it took the student from the apprenticeship environment into an artificial setting. And we wanted to go for efficiency rather than effectiveness. This is where the argument yesterday, if those of you all stayed back, how can we be holistic when parents are looking for grades? We started having those meaningless conversations because we started breaking things apart. So school, whether you like it or not, was this greater evil that we have to deal with, right? And on top of that, we had this publishing technology that broke knowledge from the practitioner. Can you imagine if I wanted to study Newton's first law, if I was living in 1500, I had to be very close to Newton. Otherwise, how would I know Newton's law? Because the only way for me to learn Newton's law is to play ball bearings with him and see how they fall and drop, and eventually I figure out the principles of Newton's law, and that's the only way I can. But because of publishing technology, he was able to write a book, and the book could be shipped to one wooden hut in Sentul, and my father and me could have read it. Now I don't need to know Newton, neither his ball bearings. I just could understand F equals to MA and M1, V1, whatever, right? So this is the beginning of an unholistic education, because we were breaking things apart. The experience and the experiencer were split. Now the knower and the knowing is not the same. So the whole experience of holistic education is somehow artificially recreating the whole again. Okay? So this is how the next stage went. So we started having all kind of crazy things like this. It is the actual exam in China. Because it's all about content was taken out of context, and now recalling content was amount to learning. So you can actually learn to fly a plane by memorizing physics. Because that's the assumption, right? If you know a body of knowledge, whether it's in the abstract form, somehow that is amount to be able to do something. So like in the example I like to give, although I hope there is no people from hotel and tourism school here, there is a program called event management. And guess how we test event management? In a paper pencil test. The test is write an essay, how would you manage an event? There is no guarantee this character can manage an event. But we know for a fact that he can write you an essay for 3,000 words, how to manage an event. In reality, as Captain Tommy said, you know, he was just bumbling around when he sees only 300 people standing at him and where's my drink and, you know, where is this, where is that? Things can go wrong. But however, if you leave him alone in a room, he'll write you a beautiful essay, how to run an event. So this is what teacher education is faced about. Just because you talk about teaching doesn't really mean you can teach. Just because you read a book about teaching doesn't really mean you can teach. Now, however, I will come later, the converse is also dangerous. Once again, you know, suddenly this becomes learning too. You know, the whole myth, like a few more cool stuff. This is real, you know. Someone believed that extra oxygen helps, so they actually have created study bars where you go and, in fact, anybody from business school, this is a perfect incubator business. Set up, go and take one of those empty rooms, have oxygen tank, $5 an hour, just inhale oxygen and read a book, and you can sell the myth, fresh oxygen helps memory. And knowing Malaysians, we will buy it. And this is true too. So all the unemployed medical students, since it's so hard to get a position in, what's the MO, what do medical students do before practicing? Houseman. This could be your part-time business because someone believes that if you have IV inserted to you while preparing, you become more effective learner. And these are real stuff, right? I also wrote somewhere here where I took it from. Oh no, it's here in my footnotes, but it's real stuff. Now, the problem with this is this. What education for? Those of you who stayed back to last night would have realized there was a nice, beautiful forum took place that fortunately only the 20 of us were there to appreciate it. The guy who spoke about the future of work believed that education, systematic education is irrelevant because he was under the assumption that education had a utility value. And if the utility has changed, the value of education changes with it. So I only study something as long as there was an economic value to it. Then there were other people saying, but hold on, part of education is to develop citizens. You are educated for a greater good. But one guy said, wait, greater good can go by MOOCs. So this debate was beautiful. Those of you all who had stayed back, how this perennial problem of what education is for. So we have issues like, do we educate from the past or do we educate for the future? Because that makes a lot of difference whether you're teaching history or you're teaching technology. Because, for example, if I was to teach physics, I could go on the pathway of innovation and forget about the basic principles, because why talk about Newton when I need to know how to apply Newton's law? You know, And teachers have to constantly juggle this, the perennial issue versus the progressive issue, citizenship versus economic issues, present versus future, those kind of things. So the whole idea of teacher education has an issue because we don't know what to educate and what is it for. So the progressive belief, why bother teaching teachers fundamentals? We just dump the teacher in the school and let him learn through practice. One could say, wait, hold on. Teacher education is about developing future citizens. So we have to give them certain fundamentals before they are allowed to get access to kids, because they will then prepare the kids for society. That's why if you go to China and Philippines, you'll have the word normal university, is usually associated with a teacher training college. Because it was believed that kids need to be normalized. And you need a teacher to normalize them, otherwise they will be abnormal. So there was lots of teacher training model. Even now, if you Google normal university, you'll find a whole series of Beijing Normal University, Manila Normal University, all this, and all of them have strong attachment to teacher training because they believe the purpose of education was to normalize people. So this is one of the metaphors that I was talking about. The current scenario of education is to teach in compartments, in experts. And then hopefully the student put it together. So this is your typical teacher training program I have. If you look at my curriculum, there are fundamentals, foundational issues, methodology issue, and then we put you for practice. And then you are expected to put everything together. In all science, we teach in compartments, and we hope suddenly the whole appears miraculously. So these are some of my thinking. The lack of connection between teacher education and the university, the teacher education, and the training practice schools. So there's a connection between three entities: the university, the knowledge, and the practice. And if you notice, there are three distinct parts in the current practice. And that is where we in Taylor's School of Education were trying to break this dichotomy, not dichotomy, trichotomy rather. And this is where the unique design that we have come up with. We were trying to basically cover the theory-practice divide. Because historically, when I started looking at this, I started emulating the medical school program. Do you know how a typical medical school, right? It's section 1 and section 2. Section 1 is theory of medicine, which have basically a combination of all science modules. And then there is the practice. Now, once you cross the gap, you can't go back. So many medical students value the second half because the first one was just to prepare you to jump to the practice part. And they consider the second part where medicine is truly learned. But the question here is, what happened to the first part? What is the true connection between the first part and second part? So the first part assumes that there's only a fixed body of knowledge. You don't question knowledge. You take it with you and memorize it, remember it, and then reproduce knowledge in a setting. And that is the nexus that we wanted to break. So that's why in school education we came up with this notion of expansive practicum. Not in mahal, because everything in Taylor's is expensive, but expansive as in expanding. So my challenge to my school was, this is the linear approach. There is a body of knowledge, you learn, learn, learn. Then we teach you methodology, you learn, learn, learn. Suddenly we ask you to put you in a school, you practice, 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 then you graduate. We're assuming everything is non-complicated. We're assuming there is no chaos. As what any practicing teacher will tell you, no two classes are the same. No 2 days in the same class have the same experience. Yet we assume there's one body of knowledge that you can memorize and reproduce, and it will work in any setting. It is never the case. But the curriculum doesn't cope for complexity. The curriculum doesn't entertain chaos. The curriculum only entertains very sterile, sanitary kind of approach. So this is where we subsequently were trying to evolve from. And this is where Linda Darling-Hamden is a famous scholar. And one of the things that she talked about, all the good things about teaching is invisible. You You can feel a good teacher, but you can't pinpoint, oh, he's good because of this. For example, you say, oh, this guy is good because he's funny. Yes, he's funny, but is he effective? So you can't take funniness. Oh, he's good because he has good voice projection. Apparently, those days, teacher training, voice projection was tested. So what, you have a strong voice? Does it make you a good teacher? So if you start breaking up skills, when you put them back, you still can't get a good teacher. So that's why she was telling, good teaching is, there's something invisible about this. And because we can't really see, we end up downgrading what the teaching profession is. So she's proposing if you can read all those things in red, those are the highlighted parts. But the whole idea is, the great teacher, what makes him great? Like yesterday, those who were here in yesterday's session, who's the one who spoke about the home, Apex Home? Johnson. And I picked up a great slogan from him. Everything that counts cannot be counted. So all those objecting that you say, oh, I need a good teacher to have this, it's actually not important. It's that person, that the pedagogue within that person has to come out. So this is what we hope that our teacher education can bring to. So, obviously, like anything else, we start off with a student. But this is where it's so complex. Student, you shouldn't view student as an ice cube coming from an ice tray. Whether you take the second block or the third block, they're all identical. I have students come from diverse backgrounds. There are students who are high performers with 10 A1s, 5 A's in STPM, who wants to be a primary school teacher. I have people who chose teaching because their fathers believe it's a perfect job for a good wife. You can go home at 3 o'clock. You learn to work with children, so subsequently when you have children, you have a head start. And these two people are sitting in the class. How can we have one curriculum that fits a person who with 10 A's in SPM, 5 A's in STPM, who's literally Harvard, Cambridge material, who wants to be in my primary school education because she believes primary education can change the world, and her classmate just barely passed most of the subject, speaks English enough to pass my interview and says, oh, my father said teaching is good because, can go home at 3 o'clock. And then they have to encounter the same curriculum. And we have glorious learning outcomes. And we have to achieve this. So the idea is, does their curriculum accommodate diversity? Is the starting line so fixed? Are you really accommodating all the different participants? So that's where we looked, one of the things we kind of looked into. So these are the situation that we have. Sorry. This is the situation I have. The gap of preparing Malaysian teachers for an international setting. International schools in Malaysia, for most part, cherish. If you see any small spelling error, just ignore it. Your expectation is too high. I'm dyslexic, okay? International schools in Malaysia, for the most part, cherish learner-centered pedagogy centered around process-centered curriculum. Our candidates were coming from a system that entrenched in information acquisition. Remember this, our students are the one with the blindfold, right? And then suddenly, they have to teach in another setting. And this is where we were making fundamental mistakes in the early stages of the curriculum. We Googled and said, what's best education system in the world? Finland, Ontario. Among the English speaking is Ontario. Among the European standards is Finland. Very easy to copy. Then we realized one thing. If you're a Finnish student wanting to be a Finnish teacher, you actually came from a Finnish school that was actually practicing some of the most progressive curriculum. You only needed to be formally taught so you can go back and teach the way you have been taught. But for our school, it was slightly different. You came from all kinds of different schools, mostly teacher-centered, memorizing and repeating and all this kind of stuff. And then to go and teach in a student-centered environment where you have no experience about. Like for example, have you all tasted chanchalu? Chanchalu. No, Chan Chalu. It's this white green thing. Actually, it's a metaphor. I'm just trying to make things up to let you know that you cannot describe an experience, right? I can describe with all the verbs I want. If you have not experienced it, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Same thing, if you have not experienced real student-centered learning, how to engage it, I cannot talk my way out of it. That's the thing that I keep telling our academics, right? You can't talk your way out of experience. So we can talk, student-centered, you make sure the student stand in the center of the class. Or student-centered means the student decide what to learn. No, the student-centered is how the student minds work, how learning behavior works, and then how you orchestrate the learning experience around it. But the point is, how would you know? You have never experienced one. And we only have textbooks talking to you about it. Lecturers who themselves have not experienced it, memorize the textbook the night before, and then talk. How to produce excellent teacher like this? So therefore, we needed to have this paradigm shift. So that's where this whole notion of holistic education and all this. So these are some of the things I've been following closely. The emphasis on feelings, aspirations, ideas, questions of each student bring to the learning process. Education is no longer viewed as a transmission of information. Instead, it's a journey inward as well as outward to the world. Now, I have not achieved full force. As I said, this is a journey experience for me and the school as a whole. So the question is, instead of saying what skill I need to have to become a teacher, the first question is, what do I need to be before I become a good teacher? Why do I even want to teach? Like, for example, when people come to me for counseling, right? They said, oh, I want to be a doctor. I say, if you don't become a doctor, how? Oh, I don't mind being a flight stewardess. Wow, such a big jump. So my first question I normally ask them is, are you a people person or an idea person? Then he said, oh, actually I don't like being a people person. If you don't like people, then how to practice medicine? I mean, you're not cutting cadavers, right? Unless pathology. Pathology, right? Am I saying the right word? Not pathology. Who's the guy who cuts... forensic, no. Pathologist, yeah, pathologist are the guy who studied dead body, right? Okay, so that is different. Otherwise, your most patients are alive. And you need to be reasonably comfortable working with live people, right? So the question is, first you must agree, are you an idea person? Are you fascinated with ideas or are you fascinated with people? Then are you perfectionist or once again, you're an idea person, you're moved by leadership and ideas and great things, or are you a great person following details and meticulous? And once you decide this kind of characteristics, then the profession naturally falls in. You don't start off with a profession. So same thing with teaching. There is a whole bunch of self-questions that you had asked yourself before you said, okay, I want to be a teacher. Or at least even if you have chosen the path, you must be aware of certain things that you have to build and develop. So that's one of the things that we were looking at from a holistic point of view. Holistic teacher education must be conceived from the perspective of his community, particularly connectivity between parts and community. And okay. Once again, when we started our teacher education, we sent them all to GIS and TIS. People may accidentally convince that all students come in a BMW with a chauffeur-driven car, and that's not reality. We didn't want our students to accidentally get confused that the children's biggest problem is which iPhone model they had. Because if you send them to Kampung Lindongan, where we subsequently started practicuming with there, suddenly the issue of not having breakfast becomes alive. Your father is a drug addict and he's in prison, it's a problem. There, your father didn't get promotion, so he didn't get his new company car is a problem. You see, the problems different students face. And this needed to be incorporated. So what we did was we diversified our practicum. We had some rich schools, we had some poor schools. So the kids understand that the context of teaching is not whether I know enough mathematical pedagogy to teach you maths, but also the students came from different backgrounds and how sensitive I was to them and how I could wrap around my pedagogical knowledge to incorporate the problem that the student came from or the context in which the student is coming from. Now, the most important thing is the one in red. Let me ask you a first question. Just imagine I rewind your clock to, well, depending in some cases, 40 years old, some 50, some 20 years back. When was the first time you discovered or someone told you that you were stupid? I mean, some of us are born this way, so that's another thing. But I assume being academic, most of you all were reasonably top of your school. So somewhere along the way, someone told you that you were stupid. And when was the first time you heard the word that you are stupid? Who told you you are stupid? Teacher. See, for many cases, besides having an overbearing mother, otherwise it will be a teacher that would have told you that you were stupid. It's a teacher who told you that you are too slow. It's a teacher who told you so many things. Because the teacher was trying to normalize you. Because apparently in her mind or his mind, it was not you being special and it's not her job to educate you. She was, in her mind, was to bring you somewhere. Because apparently you're not good by yourself. You know, so the whole idea is the focus on the notion that every individual is adequate and unique. How do we wrap that around? Because we always had goalposts, whether you reach 90% or 80%. And the idea was relative improvement. What happened if you, like for example, in my case, I was born dyslexic. If I don't write very well, it's not my fault. But the point is relative improvement. Did I make necessary effort to relatively improve from where I'm starting from, as opposed to someone who was with a head start, whose father spoke English as though he was constipating, you know, spoke very fluent Cockney accent, educated home. And if he's writing at my level, there's something wrong with him. So the idea is, how come curriculum did not consider all this? With the teacher training, considered all this to prepare initial teachers. So that's one of the things we talked about. Diversity in practice was very important for the notion of expansive practicum. Then the student, as complex he is, he comes and positions himself in the university. Now, regardless of which university you come from, there are some of you all appreciate your university and some of you all don't. I came from literally backwaters of Alabama, a small meaningless school called University of North Alabama. That's where I graduated from. But the point is, it's the university that shaped my life. And the reason why it shaped your life is this. When the student comes in with lots of preconceived notions and all this, right? If the university doesn't challenge those notions, there is no learning. It's just affirmation. So when we talked about holistic education, I remember this for those of you all senior managers who were with me in the Pomandu lab, there was lots of discussion on whether does holistic education draw dividend in the long run? Because students are coming for qualification, let's work the efficient way, get the qualification out. The question is the purpose of a holistic education or even education just qualifying you and certifying you? Or is it to give you a new perspective to life? So I like what Captain Tony said. So what if A-levels is, or whoever said the pre-U is 9 months? The idea was to start a journey. Whether you finish it in 9 months or you finish it 20 years down the line. Do you know, I have still not achieved many of the learning outcomes from my last program I studied. For example, 3 months ago, I just realized what prudential reasoning was, which I took a course with my professor from UIA 10 years ago. And only last 2-3 months suddenly reflected, oh, this is what he actually meant. So it took me 10 years to achieve the learning outcome. But the point is, you don't know when the learning outcome will be achieved. But the point is, you have to start the instruction, start the perception going. So the idea is, when the student meets the university, does the university challenge the student's belief? Does the student challenge the student? Does the university challenge all the preconceived prejudices the student come to? If the student is not challenged, no meaning what? So if you don't meet good lecturers who constantly challenge students, there will be no learning taking place. It's just affirming what the student knows. He will memorize some books. And that is where arguments like, cheaper to do by MOOC. There's always a YouTube video you can watch Of course, if you're just talking about content, there's always a YouTube video you can watch, because you have taken the whole fight passively. My job is to instruct the student, and experience doesn't matter. So this is another dilemma of our teacher training. We teach by parts. I teach the curriculum. I have people teaching assessment. I got people teaching teaching and learning. I got people teaching foundation to science. Then suddenly all must fall beautifully and become a beautiful science teacher. And that is the paradigm shift. So let me quickly go. So I want to get to the corner, the crux of it. So then we say, okay, let's put them in practice. So engineers have industrial design, industrial practice. School of Education has practicum. Medicine has, what's the medical term? Houseman. So we threw in a third element. We said, okay, first you come in with all your complexity. We try not to care. We kind of sanitize you at the entrance. Then we put the university there. We try to give you a universal curriculum. Since that's not enough, we try to throw you in industry practice. Remember, the whole idea of the problem of this breaking things apart is something like this. You have learned the theory, you have the knowledge with you, see whether you can apply it. Now, this assumes that the knowledge you gain is very established, cannot be questioned. Because this comes from the training model. That's why those days they call teacher training. There is no decision for you to make. You just remember and go reproduce. Just like a cookbook. Don't think. Because if you start thinking, the recipe can go wrong. Don't say why he's saying 300 grams of salt. Maybe Malaysia, the salt is a bit more salty, I put 400. Cannot think. So you're supposed to do the cookbook model. And this is your classic practicum. At the end, don't question all the things you learn. You must assume everything is perfect, clean and sanitary. Just use it in a setting. So this is the biggest challenge the school education had. For us, this was not working. So, and in UK, they are trying the other model. Send them to school. Hopefully they learn through induction. By practicing, they will learn something. Because there are many great teachers who are not trained to teach. They were sent to school and they just picked it up. So this is where there is a dangerous double-edged sword. Knowledge without action is wastefulness, and action without knowledge is foolishness. You can accidentally learn a new practice, but you cannot justify your practice. And that is meaningless because you can't evolve. And just because you have memorized a whole bunch of things doesn't mean you can practice. And how do you close this gap? So it required us to think out of the box. The question is, it's very difficult to think out of the box because sometimes you are so entrenched in the box you can't see the light. So the idea came where we decided maybe the real education will take in the intersection of the three institutions, the student, the university, and the place of practice, and the chronology of way the action is taken. So that's why we wanted to do the third space. Theory meets practice, practice meets theory. There is a reciprocal relationship. That means don't learn theory and go and practice, but while practicing, go and question theory. So in some literature, they talk about the clinical approach. Because clinical approach means you question your practice rather than accepting practice as a status quo. So this is where we try to emphasize the notion of expansive practicum, where we try to balance and have the practice. We try to create a wedge where people can reflect on theory and use practice to reflect on theory and use theory to reflect on practice. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't see many practices like this. So this is quite an innovation from School of Education. What we wanted to do is this heuristic, oh sorry, I haven't changed the slide yet. This heuristic approach. For those who are not familiar with the word heuristic, it's like a classical case. The more you know, the more you can do. The more you can do, so therefore you are more capable of knowing more things. So this is spiral. So what we do is we start our practicum from year one. We start introducing you to elements of teaching, even knowingly that you're not ready to teach. But what happens is when you come back to class, you're not going to allow your lecturers to get away with rubbish. You can say, but you know, when I was in school last week, this wasn't like this. Just because you tell the students to sit down, they are not going to sit down. Where is the engagement element? So people start questioning the academics. So the practice becomes a leverage to question theory. Then when they go the second time, they say, oh, now I've learned new theories. Like, why not experiment this? So it becomes a spiral where they try to balance between learning, practicing, and reflection. And because it's continuous, we are trying to connect the gap between practice and theory by this expansive model. I'm running out of time, so I'll just move around a bit. Then we also said that because we had to have this professional teaching standards, we wanted to prepare teachers who can juggle the complexity of current practice and future practice. So we came up with this notion of a program standard saying that this is written by one of my colleagues, Dr. Lim. The professional practice, professional knowledge, and professional engagement. See, the idea was, usually in the school, in many programs, we draw a parameter. Like, for example, if you hear Priyu talk just now, they talked about, okay, what we can do within A levels, what we can do within the engineering school, what we can do within School of Education. The idea was, we hardly prepare, or in a very meaningful way, to say how you will continuously learn the day you step out. We limit learning and experience to within our parameter. So the idea was to prepare the student to engage the professional community. Obviously, we are in charge for some form of professional practice and professional knowledge. But the hardest part we have yet to engage meaningfully is how do we prepare our students to leave our campus, graduate our program, but yet have the right attitude and behavior to engage the profession itself and the notion of continuous learning. That is something that we are working on. As I told you, we have a whole series of practicum, and we have intentionally chosen diverse background, poor school, rich school, international curriculum school, international school, so that students know that the complexity of learning is not the content knowledge, but the place of practice and the community that you practice with. Teaching cannot be independent from the community that you practice. Just like someone said yesterday, the teaching cannot exceed the quality of the academic. So does the teaching cannot exceed the quality of the students. Because a good teacher starts teaching where the learner is. If I want to bring him to this podium, I have to, well, I can entice him, say, come here, come here, come here, and he may not be inspired. The second thing is for me to physically actually move there and bring him back. So that means the teaching literally starts where he is. So if you have no idea how to analyze the community that you are working with, you will fail for sure. And I hope you fail, because then my theory won't be wrong. Now, because of time, because of time. Now, sorry, I haven't changed this yet. Now, this is a sample. We have 9 practicums. We are the only program. We have keep always being criticized by all auditors. How come other school got 1, 2, why you have so many? So, but this is intentional. We break our practicum to sub-skills. We want to see students experience sub-skills individually so that we give highlight to all the sub-skills. And so that by the time they finish the entire curriculum, they have demonstrated competency in sub-skills. They have demonstrated acquiring the sub-skills in different communities. And because the chronology is not linear, that means it's not theory, method, and practice, it's learned, it's in a circular motion. We hope that the students become more inquiry and try an effort to make holistic education again. Okay, with this, thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Logendra, for such a lively and entertaining sharing. I'm sure all of you do agree with me. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Daniel Tan to present a token of appreciation. Okay, any Q&A?
I hope you all have reduced your expectation.
Yeah,
and then
okay.
So far my strategy worked. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As you mentioned that there are students who sign up to study education, for different motives. How would you advise, or do you actually advise any students that you think that their motivation, you know, is not, or their expectation may not be what they're gonna get later when they become a teacher?
Now, that's a very interesting question. So there are two parts to this. One, I'm a businessman too, right? Student number matters. Now, however, we are not a $2 prostitute. We are more like the $100 one. We have some standard before we sell ourselves. First, we see the motivation. Now, obviously, some may not, they don't know that they have the potential to change the world. I mean, like for example, I have a student which every time people highlight, hey, Dr. Logan, this girl is going to graduate soon. Sure or not, she can get a job in an international school. So I called this girl once and said, I need to talk to you. Why are you attracting so much of buzz? That every teacher has come privately and told me that they are afraid that this girl cannot be employed. Then I asked her, she said, well, I grew up in a plantation, not too far here in Selangor. My father was a plantation worker. Then when he retired, he took his EPF and opened a sundry shop. So I'm the richest woman, or my father is the richest man in that community because he runs a sundry shop. She's the first generation to finish high school and come to university. She can reasonably speak broken English. To her, that's completion in life, you know. And then she said, oh, Dr. Logan, after that I have to finish my master's because my parents have already found a suitor and he has instructed I should do my master's. Now, there's nothing wrong because to her, she has traveled a great journey because she's taking her father, who's a plantation worker in an estate, you know, and then she studying in university, can speak English, first generation to come out of this. I hope we can take pride that it is our responsibility to spark the light because she has the potential. We can spark the light because one part of education, remember, when we engage the student in university is to challenge the perception. So I hope my 3-year experience at Taylor's University School of Education, we can challenge the person to see life beyond a sundry shop owner. Because to her, I'm one step more than my father's, is good enough. Is to see that you actually have the potential to be beyond a wife. You can see a potential beyond being a daughter of a son. So that's, now on the other hand, we also have turned students down because these are your typical student, you know, finish and then don't know what to take. So I said, no, we are not going to risk our kids because you don't know what to do. You know, so obviously we turn some people down, but some we see potential because they themselves has not discovered the power within. So I hope I've answered your question politically correctly. Of course. Anybody else? Yeah.
Dr. Logan, thank you for the very interesting talk just now. Yeah, so we accept the fact that for holistic education, we have to first basically know our students, right?
Yes.
We have to know them. So I think that the challenge that we face these days is that we come across students with all sorts of problems. We have, on an increasing percentage, students with psychological problems coming into our classes, and I don't think we are equipped. And I do not know what is being done to help us to equip ourselves to be able to recognize and then further go on to help these students achieve in class.
Actually, I just came back from a conference and what you brought up was very relevant because in the state of Victoria, Australia, now they are making teaching a master's only profession because they felt your typical 1-year teacher preparation is not good enough. Teaching has become so complex because students have become so complex. And teachers are expected to deal with far more complex issues. So the historical teacher training was just teach you the method, how to teach a subject. So now, because they needed a longer runway, they have converted all their teacher training from a 1-year program to a 2-year program. Thus, their initiative to actually have masters. But also on a personal note, don't forget, many of y'all started teaching because you love your subject. Or in my, there are two kinds of teachers. One, you love your subject, and you don't know what else to do, so you go and teach your subject. 2, you love your subject so much, but you're not good enough to actually practice your subject. Like in my case, I did maths, but I wouldn't be a great mathematician in any way or form. So the best is to go and teach maths because, partially educated here and not complete. But the question here is this. My job, once I become a teacher, my job is not about bringing maths alive. It's only part of my job. The other half is bringing students alive. And until teachers actually seriously see a job an educator is to beyond the content, They will always have this problem, because when you choose professional development, many people say, oh, I want to do more maths because I'm a maths teacher. I want to do more physics because I'm a physics teacher. Actually, you want to do is, how do I engage kids better? How do I resolve kids' issue? Because you are working with kids, your raw material is the kid, no more the content. You may have ego that, I wanted to write an original thesis on Faber theory or uncertainty principle, and that may not have come through. Thus you are here. But once you are here, now your primary job is not to worry about Faber theory or uncertainty principle, but it's actually bring people alive. That's your principal job. So when you said, now when you see students are getting more complex and more complicated, how do you prepare? Obviously there are institutional effort. Institution now must see that professional development is not about content and pedagogy, but also preparing sub skills. But also from your point of view, as a teacher, you must see yourself that now I need to equip myself with all these other skills, because that's how I bring people alive into the classroom. I hope I've answered your question. Oh yes. Last one, huh? Okay. No, because we also have to worry about the next thing, right?
Yes, good evening, Doctor. Thanks for the great talk.
Yeah.
All right. In my opinion, psychology subject should be incorporated into the national as well as international syllabus in order for us to achieve this holistic education. And this psychology subject should be started in the primary school as well. What is your opinion regarding it? Because these students who are attending the psychological studies in the primary school, perhaps one day will be teachers who are going to look into students who are coming in with so many other problems that we have been talking about today. Thank you.
That's an excellent question. But first thing you must answer this question. When we introduce maths as early as standard 1 or kindergarten, do all of us have high literacy in maths? Or when we introduce reading and writing, do all of us, why your idea it's a great idea, it's a very noble idea. But the problem is, what teachers are going to do? They're going to prepare you for a bloody exam. They're going to ask you to highlight all the important ones in some color highlighter, make you memorize and take a test. So your objective of subsequently they becoming very enlightened soul and being aware mentally, emotionally, may die off because there'll be some evil instrument like UPSR exam or some exam. Just like moral, you can ask all your students, how do you get A for moral? I think you have to memorize 128, and the most immoral thing happens in the world, but they got A for moral. So you must be mindful of how that has happened and ruined the education. Okay? Thank you very much, folks.